put into law. And so they legally, it was correct. Her fine was $10, and she had to pay court costs that was $4. So you can imagine, and I remember back in those days that those women weren't making any more than about $50 a week at the most. So that was a whole, yeah. But anyway, this started, they took on her cause, and they unified and refused to ride the buses for like 385 days. And of course, this transformed him into a national figure because King was arrested during this campaign, which concluded with a United States District Court ruling in Browder versus Gale that ended racial segregation on all Montgomery public buses. So we can go on and on with the different. He was in Albany, Georgia, 1962. Things didn't go too well down there. And I'm pretty sure you know about the Birmingham experience. Yeah. And you know about the experience at Selma. Yeah. Now, one thing that he showed at Selma was persistence and planning. The first time when they crossed that bridge on that bloody Sunday, the Pettus Bridge, Martin was not there. The second time when he had planned to march, the judge entered, I think, an injunction that they couldn't march. So all the time he is communicating back and forth with President Kennedy. So they asked him not to cause a big problem because Kennedy was afraid that this might thwart his efforts to get the civil rights legislation passed. But anyway, they just went there and they just kneeled down and prayed. But the third time they came back with the United States troops, United States Marshal, and they went across the bridge, unimpeded. So, and we know about the episodes in Augustine, Florida, but what many people remember him most for is the March on Washington in 1963. Now, King was just representing the SCLC. That was what you might call the Big Six civil rights organizations. And some of these names you'll probably recognize. Roy Wilkins from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Whitney Young from the National Urban League, A. Philip Randolph from the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, John Lewis from SNCC, and James L. Farmer from the Congress of Racial Equality. The march originally was conceived as an event to dramatize the desperate condition of blacks in the southern United States and an opportunity to place organizers' concerns and grievances before the United States. Again, Kennedy became concerned. He was concerned that if this march failed, that it would really hamper his whole efforts on the Civil Rights Act. So he notified numerous church members, organizations, the unions, and they had a real good turnout. Now, the interesting thing about Martin Luther King's speech is that it was initially planned to only be for about 5 minutes. It ended up to be 17 minutes and to be, of course, one of the great oratory pieces in history. Who kind of inspired him, and it's very interesting they mentioned Mahalia Jackson. Mahalia was there, and she said, "Martin, what about the dream?" Because he had been talking up in Detroit, and he had mentioned about the dream. And when he started talking about the dream, well, it went on for about maybe 12 minutes more. And that's where that came from. And of course, that's one of the speeches that he is greatly remembered for. I have a dream that one day the nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, this is not something created equal by the United States Constitution or by the Declaration of Independence. This is something that was created by God.
Yes, sir.
And this is really, you know, what, they say, well, what motivated King? Well, what motivated King is that he was a Christian minister. And he was following the teachings of Jesus. So a lot of his nonviolence came from that, you know, turn your cheek, you know, help your neighbor, you know, all of the different things that, that Christ advocated for. Now also, he studied history. And if you remember the last speech in Memphis over there at Mason Temple, he went all through history talking about the different times in history, the different things. And in thinking about the nonviolence, he thought about India. He said, now India was controlled by Great Britain, one of the most powerful countries in the history of the world. And they were able to obtain their independence without a shot being fired. And it was through the nonviolence means. And so that's what kind of pointed him in that direction. He even came to our city of Chicago. I think that was like in 1966. And he was with James Bevel, and a young man playing the saxophone kind of reminds me of a young man that traveled with him by the name of Ben Branch. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when King was killed, Ben Branch was the last person that he had talked to, you know, there at the Range Motel. Yeah. So, in Chicago, he was mainly going to talk about things that were in law, that is the fair housing laws. Despite the fair housing laws being passed, there were many parts of the city where blacks could not buy housing even if they had equal qualifications with whites. And they tested this out by sending in people who were picked purposely for this. And of course, Mayor Daley was very upset because it uncovered some problems in his city that he did not want people to know about. One thing that Ralph Abernathy said, and Martin Luther King also verified this, is that the hate and the anger that they saw in Marquette Park, he had never seen in his life anywhere in the South. He said he did not see it in Selma, he did not see it in Birmingham, anywhere, right there in Chicago. And I was the chairman of pediatrics at a hospital called Holy Cross. And Holy Cross Hospital looks right out at Marquette Park. It's a big park. And I would just stand there and look out there. And so I remember the time that we couldn't even come down the street. I said, now I'm the chairman of this department.
Yes, sir.
Amen.
Yes, sir.
Amen.
Yeah. And we look into, say, like politics. Now, this is where Martin Luther King was not really that much into politics. He felt that we should not enslave ourselves with one party so as to accept anything that this particular party did. He did not really promote any particular candidate, although he had thought about endorsing Kennedy if he had had a second term. So then comes up the question, people say, well, what would Martin Luther King say about Obama? So we all in Chicago, you know, we love Obama. I attended the same church with him. But what kind of happens is sometimes the thing that the person says is a little different from what the administration is able to accomplish. For example, now, if you remember anything about Martin Luther King, remember there were 3 isms that he worked against. He worked against racism, he worked against capitalism, and he worked against militarism. Now, of course, those latter 2 can cause a lot of controversy in the United States, because we are a capitalistic country and we are a military might. So that was very controversial. So, and as he mentioned one time, he was in a speech, he said that, well, it's very easy to integrate a lunch counter, but it's much more difficult to guarantee a man an annual income for a year. So he started to move in that direction. And I think that's some of the problems and the stresses that he had during the latter part of his life. The problem in Memphis, of course, and what a lot of people didn't know is that even after he was killed, that the sanitation workers did get arbitration, which was in their favor. So that did work out. The Vietnam War, that turned a person who was initially his friend, as we might say, Lyndon Johnson, into his adversary. Now, J. Edgar Hoover had always had his own little agenda of monitoring Martin Luther King and trying to find dirt on him. But in about probably 1965, sometime around there, it was maybe 63, soon after John Kennedy was killed, Robert F. Kennedy put forth an order for observation of Dr. King. I mean, it was official then, that he was put on the list and he was monitored everywhere. As a matter of fact, any room that he stayed in was bugged. They even sent him information to try to encourage himself to commit suicide. But he was very strong, and he just let them know that, no, this does not work, because I serve a much higher calling.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. And then there was always the allegation of the communism. Now, there was one guy that was, his name was Stanley Levison. And they said that the Bureau received authorization to proceed with wiretapping from Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy in the fall of 1963, and informed President John F. Kennedy, both of whom unsuccessfully tried to persuade King to dissociate himself from a guy named Stanley Levison, a New York lawyer who had been involved with the Communist Party. And this brought about another point that we would make, and this comes up, is that we cannot exercise or not associate with everybody just because they associate with somebody or something that we don't agree with. For example, in this day and age, there's the thing about the gay rights. Now, having a good feeling for Dr. King's philosophy, because I came from pretty much the same church, the Baptist church, I believe he would have gone along with the gay rights. I don't think he would have gone along with the marriage part. Yeah. I think, knowing him, he probably would have been anti-abortion. Yeah, these are things. So, these are some things that we can think about. And the main thing that I want the young people to do is read your history, get it from an accurate source, and know your history and go over it over and over again, because what you will find in the years to come, that there may become new information out that will try to demean this person. As a matter of fact, there was a court order that certain information that the FBI had, that this information could not be presented to the public until 2027. Yeah. So, legacy. What was King's legacy? King's main legacy was to secure progress on civil rights in the U.S. Just days after King's assassination, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Title VIII of the Act, commonly known as the Fair Housing Act, prohibited discrimination in housing and housing-related transactions on the basis of race, religion, or national origin, later expanded to include sex, familial status, and disability. This legislation was seen as a tribute to King's struggle in his final years to combat residential discrimination. Internationally, King's legacy includes influences on the Black consciousness movement and civil rights movement in South Africa. King's work was cited by and served as an inspiration for South African leader Albert Luthuli, another Black Nobel Peace Prize winner, who fought for racial justice in his country. The day following King's assassination, there was a school teacher named Jane Elliott who conducted her first Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes exercise with her class of elementary students in Wrightsville, Iowa. Her purpose was to help them understand King's death as has become a national icon. So in speaking once about how he wished to remember, we all remember this, he said, "I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody." Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness, and all of the other shallow things will not matter. Thank you.
We can never know where we're going until we know where we came from.
That's right.
Thank you so much. Would you give Dr. Speed another hand? Thank you so much. It's going to be very important that our young people stay and listen to our speakers. Okay, not just sing and